Hi, my name is Khleif, and I'm the host of the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. And every week I interview multifamily rock stars, and we talk about how they've built incredible wealth for themselves and their families through multifamily properties. So hit the like and subscribe buttons and get notified every Monday when a new episode comes out. Let's get to it. Welcome to another edition of How to Build Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Khleif, and I am thrilled you're here. And I know you're going to enjoy the gentleman we're interviewing today. His name is Gabriel Hamel, and he has 175 units and lives in Eugene, Oregon, and has some great strategies around seller financing and some other things that are dear to my heart. So let's get to it. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rod. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So listen, we didn't talk about this before we started recording, but I would like to dig into a little bit about, our conversation about self-improvement and
Sure.
motivation and things of that nature. And I didn't have a chance to pre-frame that for you. But before we go anywhere, why don't you tell my listeners, a little bit about your story? Kind of give us a kind of how you got into real estate. If you started out in real estate or you ended up there, just going there.
Yeah, sure. So in 2002, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad for the first time, and prior to that, I was in high school. I had joined the Army National Guard my senior year of high school in 1999, and then coming out of high school in 2000, I really didn't have a lot of direction of what I wanted to do with my life. And around 2002, picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad. Prior to that, I really didn't think I liked to learn or cared much about education. And I realized I hadn't found a subject that interests me. So I pick up Rich Dad Poor Dad, first book I ever read word for word, cover to cover, that I didn't want to put down. And shortly after that, in 2003, I got deployed to Iraq for about a year. And the whole time over there, I'm telling all my friends, all the guys I was deployed with, I'm coming back and I'm going to build this real estate empire. And they kind of laughed, saying, "Hey, you read a book. What makes you qualified to do this?" And I came back in 2004, bought my first house in 2005. I went to the bank in 2005, and that's, of course, during the subprime. I had no job, and the bank approved me for a loan, 100% financing.
If you could fog a mirror, you could borrow money back then, right?
Exactly. And that's what I did. And so that first house, I rented out 2 of the rooms, essentially house hacked it and lived for less than I could live anywhere else. And in 2006, I went back to the bank. I also opened up a nutrition store around that time. I went back to the bank and they approved me for another no money down loan. And at that time, I'm thinking, this is easier than the books. This is too easy. 2007 rolls around. I go back to the bank, kind of the same thing, but they said, "Hey, this time you need 5% down." And I said, "Hey, that's doable." Well, now it's 2008. By 2008, I shut my store down because it wasn't making any money. My first son was born, and I go back to the bank and said, "Hey, I want to get another one of these, no money down loans." And they said, "Hold on, things have changed a lot. You need 30% down. You actually need a job and an income of some sort to qualify," none of which I had. And so I had to come up with something new. So, I wasn't college educated. I didn't have a degree of any sort. So I took a bunch of odd and end jobs, help wanted ads on Craigslist and things of that sort, and eventually ended up in a minimum wage job in a high school special education class. And about 3 months into that job, and my heart goes out to those kids. That was not my dream job by any means. So about 3 months into that job, I'm literally cleaning up human feces that a kid had thrown around the stall thinking it'd be funny. And I start thinking about my goals. And I thought, hey, I have to get serious about my goals and dreams of being financially free through real estate. Otherwise, I'm going to end up at this job for the rest of my life. And so I spent the next several months every single day just searching for investment properties and had to find a creative way to finance those since I wasn't bank financeable. And I found a seller who was willing to carry the financing on 2 duplexes side by side. So it was 4 units, and it replaced it made almost to the dollar in cash flow what I was making at that job. And so I finished out that school year and I stopped working right then. That was about 11 years ago.
And it's been real estate ever since.
And it's been real estate ever since. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Sure. Do you love real estate?
I enjoy it. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the truly successful people, and guys, if you're listening, if you don't love it, for God's sakes, learn to love it or go find something else to do, because
Right.
life is too short not to do what you love. Well, so let's talk about seller financing. I know that's a topic that or a conversation you're really good at, that
Sure.
strategy. So let's talk a little bit about seller financing strategy, if you don't mind. Let's go deeper on that.
Sure. Yeah. For me, it was really out of necessity. And so I had read something casually about like, hey, if the bank says no, there's other ways to purchase property. I read about hard money and private money. I didn't know anyone with money at the time. Didn't have anyone within my circle. And so I thought, hey, what's this seller financing thing? And I started researching. And so what I did, I ended up getting on Craigslist every day, and I would type in keywords like seller financing, owner carry, seller carry. And most days things didn't pop up. And I just did this day after day. And what I found was there was an ad, and a woman was actually advertising seller financing, because there's a lot of advantages as the seller as well as the buyer to carry the financing. And so she was offering terms that seemed pretty fair. And I'm running through the numbers going, hey, what am I missing? This is new to me. What am I missing? And as I really dug into the numbers, I thought this will work, and it did. I still own those properties today. They've cash flowed from day one, and it's a strategy I've continued to use. So that was 2009, and so all of 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, I started purchasing small multifamily properties, 2s, 4s, 8-unit type properties with seller financing.
Nice. So let's go a little deeper. Okay. Because sometimes, people are sometimes intimidated by seller financing. Now, when in many cases, it's the absolute best solution for a seller, particularly if they're retirees. I talk about this all the time. If you find a property that's owned by a retiree, and it's fully depreciated, and if it's a retiree, they're not going to take their money and put it into a high risk investment. It's going to go in the bank.
Yep.
And you can show them that, hell, the bank's paying 1%, you'll pay 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, and they only pay taxes on the amount they receive every year. Exactly. It truly, for a retired person, is the best way to go, in my opinion. What do you think?
No, absolutely. In fact, every seller financing deal I've done is exactly that scenario. It's men and women in their 60s and 70s who have owned the property. It's depreciated out. They've owned it 30 plus years. They are really good people, but they have self-managed most of the time. They're burnt out. They're tired of being landlord. They don't want a lump sum of cash to go put in the stock market or to put in the bank or to actively invest. They want cash flow. They want cash flow. They want that passive income. And so I looked for properties, and still do, that are poorly managed, under rented, and have some deferred maintenance. So there's upside for me, but I'm able to solve a problem for these sellers. And so they're happy to essentially become the bank. They earn interest, and they get a steady paycheck every month.
Yeah, I listen. You've mentioned a couple things that I want to put exclamation marks on. For one thing is you solve a problem, and guys, to the most successful people in the real estate business are problem solvers. They wear a problem solver hat, and they look to solve problems. So that's clue number one from Gabriel here. The second thing is, he made a comment that I let slide by, and I don't want to. He said, every day you are in Craigslist looking for things. Guys,
absolutely,
when you're willing to do what others aren't, you'll be a success. And that's an example of that. Awesome. I love it. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, I know you're mostly in the smaller multifamily, correct? To plexes. What's your largest?
Correct. Well, I've moved into the mobile home park space a bit, and so my larger units are in that space. But as far as the true multifamily, I have some mixed use multifamily stuff that's 15, 20 unit.
Okay, there you go. Okay, and so I think we talked about seller finance strategy. Did you want to add anything to that, or was that pretty much it?
Yeah, no, the other thing I would say is, when I first started buying these properties with seller financing, originally I thought, oh my gosh, I have to go educate, everybody on why this is such a great scenario, because these sellers were walking away happy. I was happy. It was that true win-win. And a question I get asked more often than not is, how do I talk a seller or convince a seller into carrying financing? And I've never had to do that. And so one thing I think that's real important that's really helped me is rather than trying to educate an entire population of what seller financing is, because if someone's in their 70s and they've never heard of it and it's a new topic, it could sound very strange. And so rather than trying to educate people on what seller financing is, I decided I would spend my time and energy just getting in front of enough sellers that already knew what seller financing was.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Yeah. And then the conversation was more about, hey, what are the terms? Because a lot of these people had either bought with seller financing or are already comfortable or have done it before, and they already understood the advantage. So I wasn't having to explain or talk them into anything. I think that's important.
Okay. Well, that's, but that said, it still doesn't hurt to be able to have that, in your pocket if it pops up, and really it's really just showing them in dollars and cents. Hey, take your money from this deal. You're going to end up with 70 cents on the dollar once Uncle Sam takes their chunk. You put that in the bank. Here's what you'll make in cash flow. Okay. Now, if you work with me, I'll give you a down payment, so I'm serious, and I'll pay you 4, 5, 6, 7% interest, and you're only going to pay taxes on what you receive every year. So here's your payment from me, 3, 4 times what you're going to get from the bank. And so, it's kind of an easy conversation, candidly. But another thing I want to ask you about that I speak about that I've utilized when I've done seller financing is seller bonding. Mm-hmm. You want to speak to that at all?
I'm not super familiar with what.
Okay, well, that's a term I use for working on the relationship first, the property second, particularly with elderly sellers. How you build that relationship. It's not about, a slam dunk sale. It's about building a relationship. In fact, I think you have an example of one that you built a relationship, ended up with a property after like 10 years or something, don't you?
Yeah. No, several examples of just how important relationships are. In fact, a lot of times when I'm talking with a seller, I'm not taking the approach of some hard salesman. I'm going in there finding out if I can give them as much as what they want as possible and make the deal work. I'll do that, and that's and that's a good scenario. But I have a couple examples. The first, different than what we talked about before, but the very first person that I ever paid off when I refinanced out of the seller financing, the seller got a pretty good lump sum, and she said to me, and we had built a relationship over the last several years, and so. She was happy with getting that monthly check, and I'd made payments on time every month. And so we built up a good relationship there. But when I paid her off, she said, "Hey, what am I going to do with this cash?" And I very casually said, "Hey, you can lend it back to me on a deal." And she kind of laughed, thinking I was joking. But a couple months later, she realized, well, geez, I don't want to go put this money in the market. I don't want to go actively invest. Hey, and then she called and said, "Hey, are you serious about borrowing that money on a deal?" And I said, "Absolutely." And because we'd already built that relationship and that trust, she felt very comfortable lending out and essentially becoming a private money lender on several more purchases.
Sure. Yeah.
That's one
awesome
right there.
Awesome example. And I did the exact same thing. So I love it. Great example. So, building relationships. So, I know that's a topic that you take very seriously, which is why you've had so many seller finance deals. And, I basically from stage talk about seller bonding, but it's the same thing. You're building a relationship. You're focusing on the relationship first. And I've done phenomenal deals, seller financing, nothing down. In fact, I had one where I didn't make payments for a year because I said, listen, I got to put the money back in this property because it's a piece of what. And it was the truth. And I bonded with them. And so I did it. And that's the beauty of seller financing. But I want to circle back to something else you said. You said you want to try to get them their price. Well, the beautiful thing with seller financing is you can pay more if you can adjust other things in the deal. Yes?
Absolutely. I found that sellers are usually stuck on down payment, interest rate, or price, but never all three. And so for me, starting off out of necessity, I didn't have a large down payment. I didn't have down payments. Right. So most of the deals I did from 2009 through 13 were all no money and low money down deals. I would give the seller a fair price, but the terms were really good. And I'd rather get an okay price with great terms than a good price with bad terms. And so, and that's the key. I mean, you mentioned you did a deal where there was no payments for the first year. There's not a lot of banks that are going to say okay to that, but financing that's as creative as you and the seller are willing to get. And so that's the beauty of it right there.
Love it. Love it. So let's see, let's move Let's talk for a minute about, are you still actively buying right now?
Yeah, I am actively buying. My most recent purchase was what we had talked about earlier,
Right.
about going back to how important relationships are. So there's a developer in town, and about 10 years ago, I really admired his work. He was just building these new, beautiful, modern buildings, and I had reached out to him simply because I admired his work, and I wanted to know, who is this guy? What's his story? How is he building these things? And so I reached out. We sat down, and we'd stayed in contact over the years. I mean, maybe met up once a year, and I was watching what he was doing and he was paying attention to what I was doing. But the importance of the relationship, and really I went into that, I wasn't trying to get anything from him. I wasn't trying to sell him anything or buy anything. But about a decade later, he reached out and said, hey, a friend of mine is selling a single family home the town over. Are you interested? And I said, I'm really not looking at single family home. What I'm looking for is value add multifamily and value add mobile home parks. And letting him know specifically what I was looking for, his response was, hey, I have a mobile home park. And I said, would you be interested in selling it? He said, absolutely. I said, are you interested in seller financing it? He said, absolutely. And it just goes back to, 10 years before, I had no idea he was going to sell me one of his properties. And it's just a true win-win. He's a sophisticated investor, but his time and energy is on building A-class, properties.
Right.
And so the mobile home park,
probably an albatross, right? Yeah, probably an albatross around his neck. You don't want to screw with it. He's doing bigger things. Yeah,
exactly.
Love it. Listen, it's funny. I just interviewed a friend of mine, Glenn Gonzalez, and it's very almost identical story. Bigger numbers, but
Sure.
10-year relationship with a guy, did him right, and he ended up buying 1,700 doors from him. And it's like, the power of relationship. I love it. So let's talk for a minute. And now you also. And by the way, guys, you're thinking, why are we talking about this for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, 10 units, mobile home parks? Guys, I've one of the people in my mastermind who I helped through a couple of larger seller finance deals, has 500 doors now. These are larger deals. You can absolutely do it on larger deals as well. So that's why we're talking about it. But let's talk for a minute now about time freedom. I know that's something you take very seriously. So why don't you talk about what that means to you and how you're creating it?
Yeah, I had felt like the idea around time and time freedom was just not a conversation that was being had. And so early on in my investing career, I was really focused on the money and building wealth. And as I got a little deeper with myself and just some self-reflection and why I wanted to be wealthy, why I wanted to be financially free, what it really came down to was I wanted to own my time. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, how I wanted to do it. I didn't want a boss. And I would get in conversations with people, and often successful people that were building, these big businesses. And it almost always came back to time. They were investing in real estate because they wanted more time with their family, or they wanted more time to focus on their health, or they wanted to contribute and give back to the community in some way. And the money, it was, nobody I met said, oh, I want to swim in a big pile of money. It was all tied back to time and what freedom they could do if they had freedom of time. And I've watched people build businesses that actually have done the opposite, where it takes so much time away. And so I just think it's important to kind of have that in your mind of, asking yourself on even a daily basis, how does this activity truly affect my time? Is this giving me more time freedom, or is this activity actually taking time away from the reason I was building this in the first place?
Right. And then you look at it one step deeper. You might say, do I even have to do this? Number one. Number two, can I leverage it to someone else? Number two, and push things off of your plate. I'm in the midst of that myself personally right now. Like, I've got an interview later today that I frankly didn't want to do, and I'm doing it, and I should have said no. And I get interviewed on other people's podcasts probably 7 or 8 times a week now, and I need to say no more often as well. So this is resonating with me, Gabriel.
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. Now, you're obviously really healthy. You're really juiced and motivated. Talk about where you get your motivation from. I know you've got a wife and 2 boys, but how do you stay pumped and motivated to keep kicking butt with this business?
Sure. I continually just try to fill my life with things that are meaningful and important to me. And so for me, that is my family and my health and the building wealth and, contributing in some way. it's why I like to go on these podcasts, and it's why I'll take, short video calls with people. Just, I want to be able to add value in people's lives and make a positive change. And that keeps me going.
Love it, man. Absolutely love it. And it's funny, guys, I always do a little pre-interview before I bring somebody on, and I say, what's your outcome for being on the podcast? How can I help you? Because we don't really promote on this podcast. And he said he just wanted to add value. And I really, really admire that, brother. So, that's really dear to my heart as well. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's truth, man. And that's how I try to operate as well. It just, I will tell you, when you operate from that place of giving and trying to make things better, power moves to you. Honestly, it's the way God, the universe, whatever you believe works. And so, it really is it's altruistic, but it ends up benefiting any way you shake it. Now, let me ask you this. What's your favorite quote?
Gosh, my favorite quote. There's so many quotes that I love.
Rattle off a few.
The first one that came to my mind was, whether you think you can or you can't, you're correct.
Right. I love that one.
I love that one. Gosh, I don't know.
Well, I don't put you on the spot. I didn't prep you for this. So let me ask you this. And I love asking this question. I know you're 37. If you went back and told your 21-year-old self something about with what you know now, real estate specific, what might you do differently or tell that younger version?
I'd say build more meaningful relationships. And so, I think early on I felt very much like a lone wolf. I didn't know anyone that was doing it. And really lived a fairly private life as far as what I was doing, and didn't really share with a lot of people what I was doing. And I realized other people in the space, I can't look at them as competition. You can learn from people. And I think it's important to get around people that you can learn from, that you can teach, that help motivate you and keep you accountable. And I think that's really important. It goes back to the value of relationships.
Love it. And, I do sold out live events all over the country. We're doing about 4 a year now. We just had a big one in LA, 600 plus people. And the next one's in Orlando. And I get people coming back and back like 2, 3, 4, 5 times to my events, because this business is a team sport. It's all about relationships. And, there's more people out in the hallways sometimes than they're in listening to me, which, it's a great thing, honestly, because really this business is a relationship business. And so I love, being able to facilitate that. It was absolutely, I got goosebumps walking through the hallways at my LA event, because I'd never seen so many people networking in groups of 3 or 4. It was just freaking awesome.
And so that level of conversation is really high, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And people rave about it. I mean, that's one of the big pieces. And by the way, guys, it's rodinorlando.com, and we are selling tickets like crazy. So it will sell out. We had to turn people away in LA. So, and it's still early bird pricing too. Depending on when this airs, it should still be early bird pricing likely, because this will air pretty quick. So let me ask you this. Why do you think people fail to succeed in real estate?
Yeah, I think it's fear. I think people let fear hold them back. So I think, I talk to a lot of people that have that initial desire. They want to do something. They want to make that change. They have the desire, but I think the important part is the execution. So we all get that taste of want and desire, or this dream, but I think the taking the action part is the important part, not letting fear hold them back from doing what they really want to do.
Yeah. I spend quite a bit of time actually at my live events on this. We have a limiting beliefs exercise. We have a lot of work around, of course, goal setting, around creating an identity that you want to aspire to pull yourself into, and fear is a big one though. Fear
Sure.
and limiting beliefs. So many people walk around with them. Well, listen, brother, I really appreciate you being on the show and where your heart's at, and it's a real pleasure to meet you, and I hope we stay in touch, brother. And I thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, brother. Take care. See you.
You too. Have an amazing day.
Thanks.